Once I tested the multiple speaker thing and it's working.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm also trying a fancy like OBS background remover thing. So I have a green screen behind me, so we can see how that turns out in the final thing. It's my first time trying to use OBS, so my best guess is it will not turn out well.
No, it's working well. Uh, we can see that you are not in your
Oh,
somewhere in San Francisco.
oh, I didn't even hit start recording. Okay, so now I started recording, so I have a video. It's good.
Yeah. Uh, shall we start?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right then.
Okay, so this is going to be talking about fast HTML, and there was two topics that I was going to talk about. One is how to use the fast tags and manipulate them a little bit. Things like how to use conditionals, if statements. Some of those are inline, some of them are broken out. I'll share at least my opinions on, you know, nice patterns to use there, and then how do you read it when there's some sort of like looping. So there's for loops, there's list comprehensions, there's maps. So we'll cover some of those. That'll be in this notebook. And then after that, the next topic is a little bit of a direction change, but not really that big of one, which is if you don't want, or if your file grew to the point where it's more than one file, you need more than one file to put the whole thing in. How do you define routes, or how do you split it up so you have more than one file? I've got like there's a million different ways to do it. I picked four. There's a GitHub repository that has all those examples that I'll share that you can look at after, but I will cover what I think are the four most common. Um, cool. So we'll get into the fast HTML stuff. So this is just in a notebook. This is a Marimo notebook. The first thing for fast HTML tags is if we look at a fast HTML tag, a div maps to this div. If you're familiar with HTML, this can be useful to know that it is this one-to-one mapping. If you nest things, as you can see, div with parentheses matches to the div with the pointy brackets. And so it's not doing a transformation thing. It's just doing a syntax translation. It's a little bit of a different syntax, but it's the same thing. So eventually in HTML, you want to build more complicated things. And sometimes you have a static page, which basically means you've got this HTML file and you don't really need to change it super dynamically. Sometimes you want to manipulate it more in Python. And that's where having it in the syntax versus HTML works really well. So the first is you can use these in an if statement. Because they're regular Python functions, all the Python stuff works. And so if you have some sort of login form, you can have a variable that says, is it logged in or not? And if the user is logged in, you can show them welcome back or any login screen. And if they're not, you can tell them to log in. This can be handled with middleware and other things, but the idea is you can have some variable that you check and you say, hey, if they're logged in, show a message. If they're not logged in, show something else. And this can be used in lots of places. So often for something like this is simple enough that you probably don't need 4 lines of code to make it readable. If it's very, very big and complicated, you'd want to refactor it in some way. Maybe that involves this. But you can make it much more concise if it's something simple with an inline conditional, like they call these ternaries. And it's the same thing. If they're logged in or not, this message changes. Talking about this is the login, this changes. Depending on whether this thing is there. And so this is the second format for these conditionals. A useful pattern that I use probably more so than actually rendering different content, though I do use that some, is conditional styling. And so things like if you're rendering a chat message, for example, you say like, "Hey, if the um, if the user equals user, make it green. If the user is equal to assistant, make it yellow." That would be a very bad theme choice. But the idea is like you have a chat bubble, and often you want the user and the assistant to have different colors. And so you can do that in line with this inline conditional. And so in this case, we have a score that we can change. We can't change. That's okay. We can change it this way. And we can set the style to say, look, if our score is less than 70, we're going to make it red. If it's greater than 70, we'll make it green. And so depending on how the score changes, we can change it. And this can be in terms of grades. We may want to do this. We may also want to do this, like I said, for anything that renders differently, chat versus assistant in that context, or whether it's a success or a failure. This is a nice, easy way to put an inline thing that just says like, make it this color. If not, if anyone has questions or wants to like stop me, feel free to stop me anytime.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So I come from a front-end background. I mainly work in Angular. I've also started working in React for the last 1 year. So you know how you can create different components that help you use those component tags instead of, that those components can contain the template of HTML, lots of CSS styling and inside that. So do you have something like that in fast HTML? You what
Yeah, and
like a
we'll
similar to a
oh, sorry.
component, what you did in status and grid display. This is somewhat like a component. You're just assigning the span or p tags and giving it a different name.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. If this doesn't make sense to people, don't worry about it. But there are. This is one of the patterns that I'll show that you can create, like a project card, which is a component that you can use, or a project form or a to-do form. And so you can refactor all these out into components, and I will be showing some of that. And so yeah, absolutely. So it's the same kind of idea as like a Jinja template or a JSX template. You can refactor these in any way. So because this is a Python function, we could write the same thing that says like, we can create welcome message, and we can say is logged in. You can type in that if you want, and you can say, we can refactor this to say the same thing. And our inline conditional can just say welcome message. So we could import this from any file. We can have this Python function in any file, in any format, any module we want, external library, and import it as a component, and simply pass the Boolean in. Does that answer your question? Cool. Cool. So the next thing you sometimes want to do is you want to have some sort of inclusion or exclusion, and these are again things you can put into a function that's a component. In this case, we have a form where we might want to show the email, we might not. This might be based on, rather than a true false logic, based on if you entered a particular field in a form, if you entered that you are going to attend, or you entered I want to subscribe, then the email form shows up or some other content shows up. And with doing this, you can do this with a conditional as well. You can create a list. And so your Python fast tags can go in a list if you'd like. And you can use any Python construct, such as this if statement, to say, hey, look, if show email is there, I'm going to add to the list. And at the end, I'll put it all into a form. So, I mean, I think I'm talking about this kind of these contents while I'm talking about fast tags in a fast HTML app. But I think like the biggest thing to take away from this is that all of your same ways that you can extend and use Python and create Python functions or classes or any of that, that all applies to fast tags just like it would. There's not a special like way to extend a special API for like how to extend and use fast tags that's specific to fast HTML. You use a list and you can append to the list, or you can use an if statement, or all of the same like regular Python things apply here. This pattern matching, I don't really see it very often. I mean, it's like, I think it's like Python 3.10 or newer, so it's fairly new. I like it. I think it makes code a little simpler to read. I think there are more people to use it, so I put it in. And the idea of pattern matching is it's kind of like an if-else statement where you can say like match on the status. If status is active, do something. If it's pending, do something else. If it's inactive, do something else. Anything else, do this. And so it's kind of a nice way to do if you have a lot of big if-else logic based on a particular value. This is one way that you can show that with this kind of conditional thing. Cool. The next thing we'll talk about is kind of iteration patterns. So what you'll see here is, as I'm showing this, we have a whole bunch of different statuses. Maybe these are different user statuses, and we want to, or maybe it's just describing what's there. And we want to be able to show lots of them. And examples for this is you have a product gallery and you want to show every single product, or you have a list of users and you want to show every user. You don't really want to go in and then like add each user to your HTML or into your fast tags every single time you add a user. You want something that generates a user, something that generates products, and when you add a product, it gets added to the UI. And iteration is how you do that. In this case, this is called list comprehension, which we'll cover in detail a little bit in a second. But the idea is you have a function, you have some sort of component, and you say, I'm going to apply this component to every single status. And so we see active, pending, and active other, and we see we have 4 of them here. So that's pretty useful. We can then look into for loops. So for loops allow us to say, let me use my fancy drawing tablet here. I can make it work. And so what a for loop basically lets you do is it lets you do one thing to a lot of elements. And so in this case, we have a list of elements. And for every single to-do, if it exists, so that's this, if that to-do exists, we're going to add to the list. So what we see here is if I add to this list, we have 3 to-dos here. If I have present fast HTML, if we add that to the list, it's automatically added to my UI because I have some sort of database, I have some sort of information where I'm rendering all of the contents. And again, this could be all the users, it could be all the blog posts, it could be all e-commerce, it's galleries, all images, something like that. And this is the core of it. You loop through a bunch of values and you append to the list, and then you can put it, in this case, into a list. So you can say, like, I want a list with all these elements. If one goes away, you delete one, you no longer need it, it no longer shows up. And so this is very nice in the to-do case where you have a list of to-dos and maybe you want to show all of the list of to-dos that are active, and you filter out the ones that aren't active, and then this kind of automatically keeps your thing updated. If you later add new ones on, it adds to the to-do list here. So again, another example, nothing FastHTML special here. You're just using kind of things that you learn from regular Python. It applies to this framework and every other framework. You can refactor this to make it a little bit nicer. And sometimes this makes the code more readable. If it's really, really complicated, sometimes it's nice to have it broken out so it's really clear and easy to debug. You can add print statements in easily, things like that. So it's a little bit of a judgment call. But what you'll see here is we have for to-do in to-dos.value. And we're going to do the same thing for to-do in to-dos.value. So exact same thing here. We're going to say if the to-do exists, so we see the exact same thing. We're going to create a list item, an li of to-do, And so all the pieces of logic are here. The main difference is I don't have to initialize and say like, hey, I want an empty list and then go through it and append every time. This syntax is the same for loop, and it does that part for you. And you build it just the same way. It updates exactly the same way. So I can say ABC. We can see it updates there. We can see it updates here. So this is a more concise syntax. If you're doing things that are simple, it's very nice. You just kind of have to gauge which one's more easier for you to read. I tend to prefer the list comprehension in a lot of cases, in most cases, but it really depends. Now, for some things, say you want to list all your people, and you have a component, a list comprehension is even more than you need. It's a little bit different than what you need. And so I've got a simple example where you have a bunch of data, and this could be coming from a database or anything like that. You have information on your people, a name and an age. Could be contact information, anything else. You have a component. So you have a person card that's going to show their name and their age and add some styling. And this map does the same kind of thing. Instead of looping through it, it's a little bit different, but basically I'm saying I'm going to do a map. And that means I'm going to take this first argument, whatever this function is in this case, this person card, and I'm going to apply that function to everything in this people. And so it's going to say, okay, I'm going to map person card to people. And that means I'm going to take person card and pass in this. And then I'm going to do person card, and I'm going to pass in the second one. And I'm going to do person card, and I'm going to pass in the third. So it's really doing the same kind of operation, same type of iteration operation as a loop. What you can see is this is, once you get used to the syntax, nice and easy to read. You say, oh, okay, I'm going to do this to every person. And you pass that in just the same. Again, this map isn't a fast HTML thing. That's a general Python thing. Is this making any sense? Any questions before I go over like a little bit more about looking at an actual example app?
Isaac, can you go right back to the start, please? Because I have a very specific question. So here's something I don't fully understand. I feel like I missed something fundamental, and this was sort of the essence of what I was putting in the Discord chat. So I get the sort of way, you have the div and then you put the p and the span in there. So I get, you can wrap stuff in a div and it will present perfectly. Now, if I think a common case I find is I'll have a template of a web page, so a header or a sidebar, and then I'll have a pane for content. So imagine, I've got a main tag, class content or div content. And then maybe using HTMX, I'm returning some HTML to put into that content, depending on what you've pressed. So I've already got a containing div tag in the template. Imagine I wanted just to insert a H1, so a header, followed by a paragraph. I don't understand what the syntax would be for that, other than writing, div and then putting the H1 and the P in there. But it feels like an unnecessary use of a div because I've already got a div class content in my page. I don't understand how I can just put two sort of sibling elements in there, a H1 and a P. I don't understand the syntax. Now, I feel like I'm missing something fundamental, but I don't know if you can. I'm happy to write a div every time to wrap them, but it just feels like it's overkill. So I wonder whether I'm missing something fundamental or there's a different way of thinking about it. So yeah, that was my question, if it makes sense.
Yeah, so I guess you have some sort of route and you want to just like kind of what you're talking about here. So we say we have hello world and we have a paragraph. That's goodbye world.
Yeah.
And so you're saying you want to insert this into your page.
Yeah.
You don't need to wrap, you don't want to wrap it in a div, basically. Is that
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Good. So that here. So I think I might have a blog post that covers this. Otherwise, we'll do a live example. Okay, that's not going to be a good example. Yeah, so okay, so if you have a page, let me just open up an example. Let's make a small example here. So I'm going to make a quick, simple app. All right, and bear with me 1 second here. We'll just create a button. So let's click me, serve that. And since I already have a bunch of apps running, let me do port equals 1. We're done with that. All right, let me go here. $5,000. I said 5, I think.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got an app here, and let's make sure we're on the same page here. This button is inside the body,
Yeah.
and we might want to insert information like say below the button when you click it, but we don't want to wrap it in a div tag, right?
Yeah.
So typically, probably the most common like pattern with HTMX is you have some sort of main element, so we'll return that. And you would often have an empty container here. And you would say, this is your container for your content.
Yeah.
From there, we would go, if I'm losing people, just stop and ask. So from here, all we have is we have a button and we have an empty thing with the content. And so we look at this page, it looks exactly the same. We just have this main, we have this button, we have this content. The button doesn't do anything yet. So now what we can do is we can create functionality here with HTMX. So I would say hxget is equal to /click, something like this. And we can target this container. And so I say I'm going to target this content. And so what this is now going to do is going to take whatever I do and it's going to swap it into the inside here. So the challenge now is that typically, I think what you want to do, which I don't think is normally do, I think what you're saying is instead of returning something like this, So instead of doing something like this, you just want to return it without the div. Is that right?
That's exactly right, Ian.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways. I don't have a great answer for you here. Normally, when you return things with HTMX, you're going to say it's going to look for an HTMX partial or an HTML partial. I mean, and so what that means is if you return multiple things, you can swap multiple things in, but they're going to be swapped into different locations. You can look at what an out of band swap is.
Yeah.
And so typically you do something like this: you swap it in with a div, or you do something. So like because this is an HTMX partial, it's going to be treated the same. It's going to be swapped into one location. And so if you want all this stuff to go into the same location, you typically put it in a div, you put it in a card, you put it in something, and go into that location. If you got rid of this and you said, I'm going to have a paragraph tag with clicked and another one, so we've got kind of a tuple. The main problem is that HTMX isn't going to know. It's going to say like, hey, I'm looking at this first HTMX partial. This is a piece of HTML. I'm going to target it with content. What do I do with the other one? And there's no definition here without like an out of band swap.
Yeah.
And so let me refresh this here. And so I think by default, okay, so that may be, so I might have just led you down the wrong path. You might have just taught me something here. Okay. Yeah, so it seems like it works. So without the content, it swapped them both in here. So okay. I guess that answers the question.
If you just go back to your code, then a quick look. Let me just see what. Okay.
I would typically wrap it in a container. Just because I think it's nice to say like this is one. Like it's nice when I'm doing this and I'm returning additional objects. You know, I find it's kind of nice to say like, okay, it's very clear. Like even now that I know you can do this, I think it's very clear that this is a single element that is grouped together. If they go together, but it looks like you don't have to. So
yeah. Okay, no, that's fine. That's helpful. Okay.
Cool. All right.
Thank you.
So on organization of this, in this repository, which we can drop the link to, it's there is a single file app here, main.py, and there's refactored into 3 different ways of doing it as well to divide it into multiple files. So let me show what this to-do app does. It's a simple app. We have different numbers of projects. We can say our, lecture project. We go to our lecture project. It has a creation date. When I go into it, I have a to-do. We can say live demo that we just did. This has a date. We can, mark it done, which just adds strike through there. We can edit it. So maybe I want to add more details. That's today. I can change it back to yesterday. If the date is passed, it's red. We can edit the title. We can delete it. We can have multiple to-dos, multiple projects. So this is the kind of the example app. And as we do this, we see that it's, organized here into a single file. And so we have a database where we define our projects and our to-dos. So there's a SQLite database. I won't cover everything here because I don't think we have time, but feel free to ask specific questions, and then the GitHub repo will also be there. So we define a database. We have a project table. We're going to track the ID and the name of it, and we have a to-do table. We're going to have routes to delete to-dos. We're going to have a component. This is a to-do card, so we want to create every to-do as a card, just like we were talking about with iterations, how you often want to create a UI component for every single thing. In this case, we want to create a card for every single to-do. And so we have all that logic refactored in here. We have that same thing for project cards. We're creating lists so we can have them in list format. We put all this together. And I tend to like having my routes very small. And so like the main page, this is showing the main page. I like saying, what is the main page? I make a project form and I make a project list, and most of the logic is not actually in this page at all. It's somewhere else in components. That's something I like to do. But you can add any logic you want in here. Yeah, just kind of building these up. And so there's quite a bit of this Boolean logic here. There's quite a bit of the iteration logic here. You can see, just like we saw in the example, we create a list and we say, if there's an ID, we're going to append something. Yeah, so this is just a single file app. So all of this is in a single file. For an app like this that's simple enough, it works great. There's not a whole lot of reason to split them out. If it gets to a point of complexity, sometimes it's helpful. So that kind of leads to the question, when is it helpful? And it's kind of when you need to. So there's a few things. If everything is pretty simple and it's a to-do app and everything's well scoped to like, I'm just going to manage a to-do list, a single file is perfectly fine. If at some point you say, hey, I want a to-do list, but I also want an email organizer. And I'm going to have one page to manage a to-do list, and I'm going to have another page to help me organize my emails. A lot of times that's where I'm like, I would rather have those in two separate files. They feel different enough to me that I like when I'm working on to-dos, I just want to see that. When I'm working on email organization, I just want to work on that. Mugda, did you have a question? Sorry if I butchered that name.
Hi, because we are looking at input, I wonder if FastML has some kind of input validation, just like you had that map function. Is there some kind of smart input validation handling here?
Yeah, so there's some. Now, any input validation you want to do, you can use any basic Python thing to do. So you can validate them with some sort of pedantic model if you'd like. You can put any kind of if statement checking logic you'd like. Now, what you'll see here is in upsert to do, let's start with this one. In toggle done, I'm getting an ID and I'm type hinting for an int. And this isn't just a type hint, it's actually this route is looking for a variable to be passed through where the name is ID and it can be cast to an int. And so this is doing a little bit of validation for you. If it's not something that's an int, you won't get that variable. In upsert to do, I want to bring in, I need all the information from a to do. And so you can see that this to do is type hinting to the to do class. And if we look up here, we can see that this class is saying it needs an ID of an integer, a title, a done, a due date, and a project ID. And so you can use classes as well in here, and it's going to check the types and do that conversion for you. More validation. I mean, you can build heavier or as much validation as you want. You can access directly like the starlet requests and objects to get really low level if you have something specific, but for a lot of things that's enough. So
I was considering something like, what you have at client end validation, client side validations that are triggered as soon as you move focus from a field, as used to happen in JavaScript. That kind of thing.
Yes. So any kind of JavaScript you can write. And so just like you can put a div tag or a p tag, you can insert a script tag. And a script tag can have any kind of JavaScript. And that JavaScript can be written in a Python string if it's really short. Sometimes that's fine. Or you can have a JavaScript file where you're just loading it in. And so this is just creating HTML, which the browser's going to render. And so you can insert any JavaScript into either on click events or as a script tag or any of that. Now, sometimes that validation is nice in JavaScript. FastHT. There is a site here, which I forget where it's located. Okay, cool. There's also the approach where you can do this validation inside of Python. And so in this case, you have a form where you can type information in, and you can see I immediately got that email is already taken. And I can see that in this one example, this is the only one that will pass. And so I can do this. I can say, is this cool? No, that's definitely not the right answer. I have to answer some sort of value here. I need to under between 1 and 10. And so you can do this validation, and this looks like it would be done in JavaScript, and it can be. But this actually can also be done inside of Python. And so you can move a lot of your logic from JavaScript into Python. And so everything can live server side if you'd like. It depends on what you're doing, but this is just another option.
Mm-hmm.
And the way this works is we have these validation functions, and so let's see here. As we go through this input, we can see we have a post request to these routes, and these routes have all the validation logic in Python. The email one has this email regular expression. This one has, is this in yes or definitely, is this here? And so that's just another option for like validation, is you can do this with HTMX. And there's examples of this on the HTMX documentation page as well, but this is done in FastHTML.
Okay, so what I'm looking at right now, what we are looking at right now are all server-side validations, or they are client-side ones?
Yes. So this is server side. I don't have an example offhand of client side, but you can definitely do it because you can insert any kind of JavaScript. So for example, this the way this syntax highlighting works is, let's go into the head here. So you can see in here, the way this works is, HTMX is a JavaScript library. So that's just being loaded into a script tag. And that's giving behavior here. We can see that there is highlight.js. And so we can see this is another JavaScript library that's being brought in. And highlight.js is responsible for this syntax highlighting. And so even on this page, even though I do a lot of stuff server side, I still have elements of JavaScript mixed in. One for HTMX, but two for like syntax highlighting, and one of these could be a library or your own code to do server-side rendering, and that can be in the headers or in any place you would put it in HTML.
Okay. Thank you.
I like Python, so I do a lot of Python, but you can do it in JavaScript too. They both work perfect.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Aditya?
Yeah. So while you are defining the functions, here you are using async instead of like directly using def to start the function, right? So when would you suggest to use like async as well as just normal defining the functions directly?
So I don't think I'm actually getting any value out of them being async in this case, but in general, if you're going to be doing something that takes a long time, if you're doing things that are very, very fast and you don't have like massive scale, so things like submitting forms, loading a blog post, things like that, you probably don't need to worry about it at all. Async is trying to do things in parallel that are non-blocking. If you have a blog, unless you're going to have 1,000 people hitting your exact blog post the same millisecond, it's probably fine. Eventually, as you get to some scale that's there. What's more common is when you get to doing like LLM calls, and so you're going to call to a model. It's going to take 2 seconds for the response to come back, or 1 second. Maybe you're doing big calls, and at that point, you want things to be non-blocking. Meaning you want, if I do an LLM call and Aditya then does an LLM call shortly after, and then Renz does an LLM call, right after, like in the same second, you don't always want mine to go once I'm done, Aditya starts. Once his is done, Renz starts, because it can add up. Now there's async and doing, awaiting the functions, that kind of thing is one way to handle that. But there are other ways as well. That concurrent can be a whole topic. It's very deep. Cool. So that's the single file version. The next version I wanted to show is Python modules. And so the reason I wanted to show this really shows that you can organize things. You don't need anything special. You don't need the special FastHTML way to do anything really. You can just leverage how Python projects are organized everywhere if you'd like. And again, with a project that's simple, you may not need to break it out, but as it grows in complexity, you might want to. And so in this case, I have my main.py file. And I chose to say, I'm going to have my app here. And you can see all of my routes are defined, but there's only like 50 or 60 lines of code. And that's because it's loading like a project to reduce page, and it has a project list. And so like a lot of the routing logic is here, but everything else is in some other file somewhere that's being imported. And you can see it's just being imported, from pages and from components and from cards. And so when we go to pages, we can see I've got the project to do page I can import. So I can create like a little component that I can use to insert things. I have a small database module. Again, this is very simple. I wouldn't really recommend saying I have a database that's, 18 lines of code. I wouldn't put that in its own file, but it can get to the point where it's more complicated and it's larger and you need a lot of complex operations and you have lots of tables, in which case it makes sense. Your components can be in here, and you'll notice there's really nothing special about them. They're just Python functions, project card, to do cards that I'm going to use, and I have my forms. And so one way to organize this is to not think of this as like I'm going to make a FastHTML web app and try and use FastHTML to organize my project. I can say I'm doing a FastHTML app. This is a Python project, so I'm going to use the Python module system, Python imports, and organize it like you would any other software project. And so this is kind of the first way. This is kind of nice, I think. I like doing this quite a bit because I don't like learning new frameworks and tools. I like things that work everywhere. And so if I can learn something about Python that's going to apply to FastHTML, but it can apply to everything else, I tend to prefer that than trying to learn a specific thing for this framework. Now, if you end up using FastHTML and you're going to be using it for product for a year or 2 years or 3 years, I think at that point it starts to make sense. Like, oh, well, let me learn the FastHTML specific tricks. But it's very nice to just be able to use Python. The second way I wanted to show is another way of organizing it with Python called the global app. This is a way that I think can work really well. I don't know that I have the discipline for it. I find my globals ends up getting bigger and bigger until I'm confused. But if you have good discipline and you organize it well, this is great. And so the idea of this project, this approach, and this is a standard Python pattern as well, is you have this global.py file, and everything that you want to import everywhere else, you're going to put in this file. And so, for example, we have our app. I don't need my router. I just have my app as defined, and my database is defined. Those can be two different files, but in this case, it's just one. It doesn't need to be. And so you'll notice there's no routes defined here. I'm not serving the app. I'm not doing anything. I'm just saying this is something that I want globally available. Now, everywhere I go, I can see on my project page, I just chose to make one for the projects, one for the to-dos, but you can organize it however you'd like. You can see I can import my app, my database, and my project. That's what I need for this page. Define anything I need. and I add to the app 2 routes, a post and a get route. And so you can see I said from globals import app. And so I am defining those routes here. I just imported that. And I did the same thing for the to-do. For the to-do, I from globals, that same module, I import the app. And you can see I add a bunch more routes as well. In my main route, I import from the globals, and then I import the project page, then I import the to-do page. And because I have this particular ordering of imports, it causes Python to run things in the right order, which means it all kind of works. And so that's the second way of organizing and defining your routes, in different files. And so the first one is kind of like define all your routes in one file, potentially, but move all the logic somewhere else. You can have a database module, you can have component modules, which have the UI logic. Maybe you have a services layer, whatever you need, move everything else in there so that you have one file that defines all of your routes, but it's very, very short because all it's doing is calling all the business logic and the UI logic that's really refactored into separate modules. This one is saying, have your app and import the app and add your routes into separate, wherever you need, however many files you need to divide it into. Wrong thing. The third or the last approach is API router. There are others. I'm not talking about the others because I don't like them at all, but there are other ways of organizing them, and there's probably more that I don't know of. And here what we're doing is our main route. You can see our main entry point that we're going to run is we import our libraries. We have our FastHTML app, and we're importing from the project page this AR, which is for API router. And this is, a pattern that Wade created for FastHTML. And he drew it on inspiration from the API router in FastAPI to create this. And so from each page, I can import this API router, and I can say, take everything from this API router and add it to the app, and then we just serve it. And so this is another pattern, which I think is nice as well. So how does this work? The database stuff, I just put that in its own file. You can have your database stuff separately. And then we still have 2 pages, a project page and a to-do page. But instead of importing the app, we have this thing called an API router. And the way to think about the API router is when you're going to create a route, there's a few things that need to happen. One, you need to collect all the information that you need to create the route. So you need, what is the path to the route? Is it going to be / my route? What is the actual URL you want? And you need the function that's going to be calling it. Like when this route is called, what happens? And then once you've gathered that information, you need to actually attach it to your app. So normally, when you use your app or your route decorator, you're doing all that in one step. The API router decouples that. And so what it does, it says, I'm going to collect all the information I need to mount it to the app, but I don't have the app, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to collect it so that when I import it, I can say, oh, well, here's the app. Now attach it to the app. So you kind of collect all the information, and then later you attach it to the app. And that's exactly what this does. So this API router here, I say, make this a route. I don't actually have an app, so I can't put it on an app because there's no app in this file. But this is saying, I'm going to make it a post request, kind of create a little bundle, a packet, which is just a list. Create a little packet and say, like, I want to create, here's the create project function. I know I want it at / create project. I told it I want it to be a post request. Like, I have all the information I need to create it. All I need to do now is attach it to the app. And I do that for these 2. And then I import them into here, and I say, attach it to the app. And I can do that on the to-do page as well. One particularly nice thing about this approach is that the API router has something called a prefix. And so you can say anything created with this API router that I've defined here should have a particular prefix. Project would be a really bad prefix for the to-do page. Since we have a project page, we can say, cool, I want to prefix every route with /to-do. And what that's going to say is that instead of this being the /delete to-do route, or instead of this being the /project to-dos route, it will actually prefix it and say, this is actually the /to-do /project to-dos route. And so it will prefix something with it. Where that becomes handy is if you have an application where you have lots of different things on the same app. Like you have, if you have, for example, a process file route, if you have 10 or 12 different things that are very different happening in your app, and you're worried, I don't want a collision, to say like, what is process file? You could change the function names to be more specific. And so you can say like, process markdown file, and then say for process markdown file summary, and then process markdown file, I don't know, aggregates or analyze or something. So you can create unique function names, but sometimes it's nice not to worry about it too much. I can say, I'm going to prefix it with to do. And so if I have anything in here, if I say process file, it'll say /to-do /process file. There's no URL conflict. I might have another one that's summary, and I can have /summary as the prefix. And so that would be /summary /prefix /summary /process file. And I don't have any of those conflicts to worry about. Again, this is something that doesn't, if you've got like a really specific project that's, only got kind of like one main purpose, this doesn't really come up. As it gets much larger, sometimes it does. And it's kind of nice to have your URLs organized a little bit for you. Yeah, I think that's really all I had. I don't know if there's any more questions. Oh, Aditya, you got a question?
Yeah. So when I was creating like a first big app of mine, I was mixing Tailwind and Pico CSS. I had to like define the classes in the this like in a different way, and then merge those two apps together uh, through some like common routing. I don't remember exactly, but like what would you recommend when we are using two different uh, UI or like CSS classes?
Yeah, so you mean you use like Pico CSS and you use a different UI framework?
Yeah.
Or so if you can avoid it, avoiding it is nice, because when you have to mix them, it just adds some complexity. So it's nice if you could say like, in this app, I'm going to use all Pico CSS, so I'm going to use all Daisy UI, or I'm going to use all Monster UI, like whatever it is. It's nice if you can be consistent. However, if you need to mix them, the key thing is that your headers can conflict with each other. So for example, if you have a Pico CSS app and then you add the Tailwind headers to it, your Pico CSS will not look good anymore. They will conflict. Tailwind will probably override Pico CSS and remove all that styling. And so you have to be a little bit careful about that when you're mixing these. One way to do it is to submount your pages. And so that starts to get a little bit complicated, but the idea is that you can have a parent app, and just like you can mount a route to your app, you can actually mount a whole another app. And so you can have completely isolated apps. And that's how the FastHTML gallery works. You can check the code there out, which is that every single one of those examples is actually a completely standalone app that can run separately, and they're mounted. And that means that they can't conflict with each other. They're completely intermediate and independent of each other. So if their headers conflict, it's fine, because they're actually just separate things. So so that would probably be my recommendation, is if they're going to conflict, that might be the easiest. But I mean, I would try to avoid that. That's one of the reasons I kind of like, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I kind of like the Tailwind ecosystem a little bit, because there's so many different UI libraries in there that they tend to not conflict with each other too much. So like Daisy UI is great, Franken UI is great, Monster UI is great, you know. But if you pick a component library there that's Tailwind based, you know, it's nice because then like if you end up saying like, oh well, Daisy UI is not good enough because I need something specific that's not in the UI, you can probably find another Tailwind plugin, a Tailwind library that has it that you can add on to it, or you could certainly define it with just Tailwind when you need to as well. You know, and that's one of the nice things about Monster UI is you can also define Tailwind components if you like. I'm seeing a lot of chat messages that I did not read. I like the API router pattern. Good. Let's see. Using HTX for validation is helpful. Awesome. Yeah. So I think it could be very useful if you reuse some components in different projects. You don't have to redefine the same routes in main. So this is an interesting point. And the nice thing is that as I've mentioned before a few times, is that I'm not doing anything fast HTML specific here. I have a Python function that's creating stuff. I need fast HTML for it because I've got this, but there's not really anything here. And so if you're like, I need this component in like 10 apps, you can make a library. You can deploy it to, you know, to PyPy if you want. You can make it installable for that's honestly that's all Monster UI is. It does that and it defines it does some wrapping at Franken UI. You know, it brings in highlight.js. It creates some custom Tailwind components. It adds server-side markdown rendering. Like it does a whole bunch of stuff, but they're all Python functions, and that's why it can just be on PyPy. There's nothing. So yeah, you could refactor any of that into there. Yeah. So the three methods. Let me put this GitHub repo in here. Let's see. So there's the GitHub repo. So in project examples, they're all here. So there's single file, there's the globals, there's the API router, and then the last one was Python modules, where you don't use anything other than you put stuff in a Python file and you import it, you know. And you can, what goes in those Python files, if your UI is the complicated thing, then you might want to divide that out and do that. If the database is a complicated thing, you can put that in a file. If it's the LM logic, agentic tool loop logics that you're using, you know, that can go, but you can kind of break any of it out. If anyone knows how to make these call out boxes, you know, like work in GitHub, let me know. I spent way too much time on it. I thought they should just like work like this, but anyway.
I have one more request if you have some time. Can you shed some light on like how are you using like cursor rules or spec story rules to like bring the relevant context while you are coding? Once we are done.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I recently did a little talk, and I'll do like maybe a 5-minute overview of it. What's syntax? Here we go. So yeah, so I just recently did a presentation, and I'll just put this here. So this is the repo, and basically, I said there's 3 things. You can use general context, so that's like repo mix will concatenate a repo together. There's paste match, which is like a desktop app for it. There's get MCP, which gives an MCP server or a chat thing. And then in cursor rules, it kind of shows what you might do, and I say like how I use the different strategies here. which is basically always apply and apply intelligently. Everything else you might forget about. So they're cool ideas, but if you're not on top of them, you'll forget and they'll be accidentally deprecated. And then, grabbing things like LLM's text, there's information in here for those. And I think the big thing is like when you get to doing something and you start getting, stuck, or AI starts having lots of problems, I think, often the approach is like, oh, well, AI is just not good for that. And it might be, but it might be that you could personalize your context a bit. So, going through creating these cursor rules and creating context, and whether you apply intelligently or always apply or have reference files that you @tag, this is kind of, I think the important thing is going through and curating it for what you want. And so this was an example for some eval frameworks where it's like, the documentation said, here's a couple of options. And I said, well, I'm not using both those options. I'm using one. So let me simplify it. Let me get rid of useless stuff in here. This is the documentation is saying like, you can optionally do this. And I'm saying, no, I definitely want to do this. The docs might have, or the LM text might have multiple languages. So style it down. It might have dummy content. Like here's how you can inject a system prompt. Well, that's not how you inject a system prompt. So let's fix their documentation example to use your coding conventions. And the idea is just to have like everywhere that it looks, the model looks, whether it's your code or the context files, it's all consistent. And part of that means, when you get stuck, when your LLM gets stuck, often that means you need to refactor your code because your code's a mess. At least that's what it means for me a lot of times. But also it means like, you could probably curate your context a little bit. And I find that pays off because I'm not really just like, it feels like sometimes you're just fixing your context for one particular use case just to fix this one problem. But I think of it as like, I'm fixing my context so that it's better for everything that I'm going to do in the future. And if you have a project you're working on for a while, that's important in my opinion. So, and every tool is going to have this. There's going to be more things in FastHTML than you're going to use on a given project. Like nobody's going to make an app where it's like, I'm going to use 100% of the features in FastHTML. Sometimes you need a WebSocket. Some projects you don't need it at all. For example, there's lots of things like that. And so I showed a lot of ways how to organize your files. So if you've got documentation that's showing you different ways of organizing your files, you should simplify it down. So that's the short answer, I guess.
I remember you also had some fast HTML relevant rules, right?
I did, yeah. I have not, to be honest. I don't remember where they are.
Oh, we can
Let me see if I can.
as well. It's okay. But like, do you still use them? Are they still updated and relevant?
I have not updated them on wherever I posted them publicly. I don't remember they posted them publicly, but I haven't updated them there. I think the key thing though is that like if you go to like fasthtml.com, there's like a concise reference that's pretty good for that. I think that like curating your own is good. Like start with what seems to be provided by the library authors that's best, and then like curate your own. Like I know it's a pain and I know it takes time, but I think it's worth it. For you asked about Spec Story. So Spec Story is an extension you can get to both Cursor as well as Claude Code, which will and just fair warning, I am affiliated with them. They are a client, so I might be biased, but they're an extension which basically will like log your chat conversation histories with Claude Code or Cursor or whatever, and it'll just dump them into a file for you. And so you have all of the chat history in a markdown format that's available. They have ways to like automatically curate your cursor rules. Working on a lot of stuff to do. Like the idea is that there's some sort of intent of what you want in there that can be useful. So how do you take advantage of that? And I think it's always like a little bit of a trade-off, right? Like if you have all your context automatically generated, that can be great, can be fast, that can be very useful. It's probably also not going to be as good as if you spent a couple hours sitting down, carefully curating and thinking about it yourself. And so I think there's some automations to be had there, but I don't think that means I don't think there's a to get like the best AI support, whether it's on anything on any product. I don't think there's like any single approach right now where you can be like, oh, well, I'll just turn on the switch and then I get perfect things. But yeah, automation can be helpful. Spec Store is one of them, but I do think it is still helpful to think about your project and the rules files as it relates to your project as well, and then maybe use some automation to try and keep it up to date.
If there are no more questions, then shall we wrap the session?
I did have a
Yeah,
question
I
about
think
Isaac's
so.
VS Code theme, but I was wondering like
Are you-
what color that was.
That's a good question. See,
The themes at
settings,
the bottom. Yeah.
themes, collecting. Quiet light, it
Quiet
looks
light.
like.
Nice. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, I
thanks.
think it looks
Thanks.
nice.
Last question. Why Miramo instead of like a typical notebook instead of like the Jupyter notebook for this particular example?
um, I learned about Marimo. Like I've been aware of Marimo for a very long time, but I really like learned about it, and I've been talking with somebody who loves it like 2 weeks ago or something, and so I've been trying, experimenting, learning. There's no reason.
Nice.
It's
Nice.
fun. It's fun to do new things. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. No, for sure. Thanks, guys. Thanks. I appreciate you guys hosting. Thanks.
Yeah. The notebook, the Marimo notebook, is in the repo. It's a flat Python file that gets you use Marimo run to run the Marimo server.
All right. Thanks, Isaac, for doing this. And for upcoming sessions, like this is a community-based event. So if anyone would like to volunteer, just DM us. And yeah, feel free to also share about topics that you want to learn or you have questions about, and we'll try to get someone from the community to come and teach us. So yeah, I guess that's it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's end.